Well, good afternoon, everybody. We have a beautiful, beautiful warm day here in Alabama, probably in the mid-80s. Beautiful. We've had lots of rain. Everything is growing, growing, growing. The plants are doing wonderful. I've got the shade cloth pulled down on the west side over here so it doesn't burn anybody. But just lots and lots of growth. Big, big response to the weather, the temperature, the light, all the nutrients. And I'm feeding them and feeding them and feeding them. That's Oncidium Wildcat, golden red star. Just opened up that flower spike. Really pretty one. Loving the breeze out here today. Everything's growing really strong. Big, big growth. Lots of new shoots. They're growing probably at their max right now. They're growing so strong. We're only about 10 days away from summer solstice, which is the longest day of the year. So right now these guys are maxed out. They're growing at their absolute strongest right now. So I'm feeding them, feeding them, feeding. That includes lots and lots of calcium. I'm probably a couple of months behind in my in my calcium talk, but you have to do it all year round. But you know, early in the spring, it's super, super important when they start growing, and it's super important when they get to be like they are now. They're still growing super, super strong and rapidly. So having lots and lots of calcium around them is so important. Remember, orchids on trees in the wild, and even though mine are outside, they're not under trees. I have trees around me, but they're not under trees. They get dripped on and dripped on and dripped on. The rain comes through the trees and picks up lots and lots of nutrients that are excluded through the sap of the tree and also through just the bark of the tree. It's cells that are sloughed off. They pull up a lot of nutrients from the ground, and this stuff is given back off. Other animals, reptiles, birds, other plants, etc., insects that are in the trees would also donate to the cause, and all of this would be flushed down during the rain and feed the orchids. Lots of nutrients, lots of calcium, lots of amino acids, vitamins, etc., etc. It's how Mother Nature takes care of them, how they feed in nature. It's up to us to mimic that as close as we can. The closer we get to it, the more they act like jungle plants and more like their natural selves. The more often we can feed them, and the proper things to feed them. Right now, with their growth so strong, I'm making sure that they have plenty of calcium around them to make sure that I don't have any dieback, any of that black rot, as they call it. One of the reasons I'm bringing this up is I had a great comment the other day. I showed a video where I had all my plants out in the rain, and glorious, beautiful rain. They were all getting drenched and soaked, and I had a couple of comments that said, "Here comes the black rot," and I'm not taking those as bad comments. I think they're great comments. And I had several people who made comments that, "How are you letting your Phalaenopsis get rained on out in the rain? Are you not worried about crown rot?" So today I want to talk about something. I want to see if we can answer those questions and at the same time help the orchid community maybe. We'll see. We'll see. I'm going to turn you around and pop you on a tripod real quick. All right. Last time I did a drawing of a clump of orchids, just a quick doodle. This is like a close-up. This is like a close-up. Let me put you on a tripod. This is like a close-up of one of those canes, all right? And that's what I want to do. I need to zoom in at the bottom of one of those canes, and that's kind of what I've done. Now forgive my doodles, but I'm trying to get the point across. When we have long days and we have bright, bright light and lots of temperature in the springtime, when it starts to encourage the growth, those long days and bright light and duration of the light, the length of the day, etc., light and temperature influence those hormones, and it tells the plants to grow, and they start putting out those new canes, those new shoots, those new bulbs, those new leaves, any new growth at all, even a new flower spike, new buds, anything at all that's growing out of a plant, roots, etc., roots included, is considered new growth. And it's all made up of cells, cell walls, and those cell walls contain a lot of calcium. So when that new shoot comes out and the plant starts stacking up calcium cells, they stack up those calcium cells and stack those cells up, That's why they need so much calcium. And in their natural habitats, to make that shoot, in their natural habitat, there is no such thing as a calcium deficiency. It doesn't exist in the wild. It doesn't exist in orchid life. Calcium deficiencies never happen until we take them out of their native habitat and put them in our own. Then we're responsible for giving them the calcium. They would have an unlimited supply of calcium around them all the time and never, ever, ever have a calcium deficiency. All right? So as the plant is stacking up those calcium cells and stacking up those calcium cells and stacking up those calcium cells to grow that new shoot, it needs a lot of calcium. All right? Now, at the same time that this is going on, nutrients are being pumped to that active tip. Rain gets on the plant, hydration gets on the plant, hydrates the plant, nutrients start being pumped, hormones are telling the plant it's grow time, it's ready to go, pumping nutrients. Why? Because that's where all the energy needs to be. It's where all the activity is. It's where the new growth is. It knows it has to grow a great big cane or big bulb or whatever. It knows it's going to take lots of nutrients, so it starts directing all these nutrients to that new growth. Okay? Research has shown that concentration of nutrients in the tips of new canes, bulbs, leaf tips, etc. is 5 to 8 times higher than it is in other places in the plant. It shows you how much nutrients they push to those tips. Now, if we don't give them enough calcium, or even if we're giving them calcium and their media has broken down too much to the point where they can't absorb calcium because it's out of their pH range, they're not able to get calcium from one thing or another, whether we're not giving it to them or whether they can't absorb it for one reason or another, the media's broke down or they just don't have enough around them or whatever. And remember also, you know, orchid roots, when there's nutrients around them, they can only absorb what's actually on the root or right adjacent to the root. They can't absorb nutrients that are out here over on the edge. They can only absorb the nutrients that are actually on the root or adjacent to the roots. It takes water to move those nutrients again, so it pushes fresh nutrients back up and brings down fresh nutrients, so it pushes them back up against those orchid roots so the plant continues to feed. And that's why you get those start, stop growths, because it feeds off what is on the roots, actually on the roots or adjacent to the roots within about 48 to 72 hours. And after that, they're not eating anymore, and it takes water or moisture to either bring fresh nutrients to them, either you give them fresh nutrients, or just water that would relocate, move nutrients around in the media again and allow them to feed again. Does that make sense? Calcium has to be provided that same way. It has to come with it. All right? If they run out of calcium and they can no longer stack up those cells and stack up cells and stack up cells and stack up cells, they can no longer do that. At that point, what happens? Well, nutrients are still being pumped. Lots of nutrients are being pushed to this growing tip because that's where all the activity is. So nutrients will accumulate in that growing tip of the new shoot, the new bud, the new cane, or the new leaf. And this is very, very delicate tissue. And when nutrients accumulate in really delicate plant tissue, it burns it. It burns it back, and you get dieback. And it dies back. The tip of the leaf dies back. Or if it's a new shoot, it can die back. Even a big shoot, it can kill the shoot back because the tip of it dies back and black rot sets in. Now, excuse the little doodle, but I'm trying to make a point. The cell structure stacks up and stacks up and stacks up and stacks up. Nutrients are being pumped to that tip because the plant's being told to grow. We give it some hydration, or it gets hydration in the springtime, and it's flowing those nutrients to the tip, flowing those nutrients to the tip. When the tip stops growing because it doesn't have any more calcium, it can't stack up those cell walls, nutrients are still coming, they accumulate, it builds up, it burns the tip, and the tip dies back, rot sets in. Black rot is not the problem. Black rot is a natural reaction to a piece of plant tissue dying. If I take one of these canes and snap it off and toss it in the garden bed, after about a week or so, black rot's going to set in on it. That's not what killed it. I snapped it off and killed it. Black rot is just a natural reaction to a piece of plant tissue dying. Black rot in the springtime and heavy growth when the plants are having as much demand for calcium as they possibly have. Their demand for calcium is at its absolute highest is when they have these issues. If they don't have enough calcium around them, like they do in nature, then they die back. New growths die back. New growths. Calcium is an immobile nutrient. It's a nutrient that can't be moved around. Mobile nutrients like nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, if they're growing a new tip here and they need nitrogen, they can pull it from a lower leaf on an older piece of growth. When you see issues on older growth, that typically is a mobile nutrient. Nitrogen is borrowed, or potassium or magnesium. Phosphorus is relocated to an active growing tip, and that piece usually turns yellow and falls off, senescence. But that's mobile nutrients. Immobile nutrients affect the brand new tip, the brand new growths. And typically they're calcium related because that's where all the activity is. It's stacking up the cell walls and cell walls. So the black rot is caused by calcium deficiency. The black rot is just the end result. All right, now, I don't want to fall down here, hang on. If you take this information and let's try and use it in our own collections and with our plants that we have, and let's see how we can use this, okay? Now you should have a little bit of an understanding of how calcium deficiency affects the plants. Calcium deficiency affects the new growth, the brand new bulb, cane, leaf, etc., right? Right? All right, now, when I showed that video the other day and it was raining and raining and raining, the comments I got were, how are you letting your Phalaenopsis stay out there in the rain? All right? How did they not get crown rot? Think what we just talked about. Think about what we just spoke about. Where does the new growth, where's the new growth, the new bud, the new bulb, the new cane, the new leaf, where does it come from on a Phalaenopsis? Sorry for the quick movements. Where does a Phalaenopsis grow from? They grow from the crown. It's the center. The new leaf, that's the new leaf, the new cane, the new bulb, the new growth on this orchid. When the Phalaenopsis don't get enough calcium, and they're calcium hogs, they need lots and lots of calcium. It's not a nutrient they can relocate or borrow. They have to have it replenished to them all the time. They have to have fresh given to them all the time, all the time, all the time. Mother Nature normally would be providing it for them. But if we have them, we don't give them enough, that new growth, that new cane, the new bulb dies back. And on a Phalaenopsis, where's the new growth? It's the crown. It's the center leaf of the plant. So when you don't give them enough calcium, the center leaf grows back. Or when you don't give enough calcium, the center leaf dies back. And crown rot sets in. And a lot of people think it's because they got water in the crown. It's not. It's because it's a calcium deficiency. You have to ask that Mother Nature question. How do these plants stay alive in the wild? How does Mother Nature protect these guys in the wild? Most of the places where Phalaenopsis come from, they get monsoon rains, heavy rains. They can have monsoon type heavy rains from anywhere from 3 months to 8 months of the year. Now how do the plants survive that, yet we get a little squirt in the crown of them and we give them crown rot? See what I mean? It doesn't make sense. Mother Nature protects them with excess calcium. They never, ever, ever have a calcium deficiency, so they don't ever, ever have crown rot in nature. It's just something that we have in our environment. Hope that makes sense. Mother Nature protects them. It's her way of naturally doing it. It's the same way as these plants have been outside. This is their third summer outside, but this is the second year. It's 2 years in June. We're just now in June 10th or something today, or 11th. It's been 2 years since I've sprayed these guys for any kind of pest or bug, and I can take you over and show you the zinnias and the irises and everything over there, lilies that are covered in aphids and mealybugs and scale and mites, spider mites, and all kinds of creepy crawlers. But nothing on the orchids. I don't have to. Mother Nature's been protecting them for me. She takes care of it all for me. All I have to do is give them calcium. It keeps their cell wall so thick and so tough and so strong, just like in nature. In nature, they never would ever have a calcium deficiency. They would have super thick cell structure. So any plant, or any insect that would chew on the leaf or needs to stick its mouth part in a plant to suck out nutrients or suck out its meal is going to go somewhere else. It's not going to mess with these plants because of the amount of calcium they have on them. Their cell wall is very thick and tough. It's how she protects them naturally, hanging in the jungle. They survive on their own in the jungle just fine without anybody spraying them. And they get water in their crowns all the time without anybody having any issues with, or without anybody having to get it out. because those issues don't exist. Those are calcium-related issues that are just orchid myths. It's the same thing with catasetums. Oh, I see so many videos on catasetums and the books, but they write on catasetums. It's horrible, horrible, horrible misinformation. And I'm, you know, I guess how dare I step and go against 150 years of orchid growing history, I guess. That's what we're going to do here, I guess. I'm just trying to, I think there's a misunderstanding. I'm just trying to bring awareness. I think if people knew, I don't think those orchid myths would perpetuate. I think maybe we can put a few of them to bed finally here at the end of this. Catasetums are the same way. Part of the problem I see with catasetums is the way they're kept. They're kept in moss, and they live in moss all spring and all summer, and in the fall they go dormant. They drop their leaves, they're deciduous. They go dormant, and they're left in that moss until spring, and then they tell you in the springtime to replant them when you see new growth. And by the time spring comes around, moss is, I mean, even brand new, fresh out of the bag, moss is 5.2, 5.3, 5.4 tops on a good day, pH, which is almost out of the range of being able to absorb calcium to begin with. So after it sits in the pot for the whole spring and summer, and then into the fall, even desiccated and dried out, it's broken down. Even if there's a lot of calcium in that pot, the moss is not going to allow it to absorb. The pH of that moss, the pH around the plant is so low it's not able to absorb the calcium. It's out of the range. It's no different than having a calcium deficiency. Now in nature, Mother Nature, who's responsible for bringing back that calcium, replenishing it. Every time it rains, calcium runs down the tree and things get replenished. In nature, catasetum's growing in the spring. You have to ask yourself again that orchid growing question. How would Mother Nature do this? How do these plants survive in the wild? Are you telling me that every time it rains in the spring, if the orchid shoots on the catasetums are not of a certain size and the roots are not of a certain size, all those shoots or all those plants die back? All those new shoots die back on those plants if they get a freak rainstorm? No, that would never happen. Every time it rains, it moves those immobile nutrients to them. Mobile nutrients they can get, remember, they can move those from the bulb. Those catasetums have those big storage bulbs, reserve bulbs. They can pull nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, magnesium from there, but they can't move calcium. Calcium has to be replenished. They're already growing, so if something has triggered a catasetum in the spring to grow, think about it. Mother Nature's told it with light or temperature that we need to grow, it's time to grow, or it wouldn't be growing to begin with, so it's already in growth mode. So you've got a plant that's been triggered to grow, its hormones have been triggered to grow, we give it water and a week later it dies. The water hydrates, remember, that water hydrates that plant and helps it send nutrients to that growing tip, that newly growing shoot. And if there's not enough calcium around the newly growing shoot, what happens? It dies back. So we give our catasetum, it has new shoots, we give it water, and it dies back, and everybody blames the water. How do they get water on them? How do they get the rain on them in the wild, hanging in trees? And they get huge clusters up on the tops of these trees. I've seen the videos, or some of the pictures and stuff, it's incredible. And they get stormed and rained on, heavy rains for long periods of time. How do they survive that? Because the calcium is being moved around and brought to them over and over and over. They have an endless supply of it. And so their shoots don't die back. There's not a problem with giving them water in the spring. The problem is giving them water without calcium. You need to repot your catasetums in the fall, well, you can repot them again in the spring, but you need to do it in the fall when they go dormant. That way in the springtime when they don't have, they're not sitting in broken down media. The media has a little bit of life left in it, and it maybe hasn't dropped the pH quite as low. So you need to change the media out in the fall is what I would recommend to do. Also, when you change the media, add some dolomitic lime to them so it helps the media from breaking down. It helps moss and bark from breaking down so fast. It also keeps the pH more around neutral so the pH doesn't drop so they can still absorb calcium. And it also leaves a nice slow release residual of calcium magnesium around, so in the spring when the new shoots come out, they have lots of calcium around them, just like nature. We're mimicking Mother Nature, remember. The #1 orchid grower in the world is Mother Nature. Hands down, Mother Nature. If we mimic her, we always do great. So if we use that dolomitic lime on the pots, on that media, it keeps a little bit of calcium and magnesium around, so in the spring when they start growing, they don't die back. What they should be telling you is not, they shouldn't be saying don't give them water though. What they should be saying is don't give them water without calcium in it. Add 10 or 15 drops or a half a teaspoon of Calamagic or one of those calcium supplements to a gallon of water, and make sure you water with it. Don't ever give your plants water without calcium. An orchid hanging on a tree, anytime it would rain, they would never, ever, ever, ever get rain without calcium being brought to them or nutrients or something being moved around. Ever. Again, if we mimic Mother Nature, they do so much better. I'm just trying to get a visual in your head and try and get an understanding. So hopefully maybe some of this will sink in. And again, I'm not trying to pick at people or, like I said, go against orchid growing history. God forbid we do that. But Phalaenopsis, crown rotten Phalaenopsis, I think it's an orchid myth that needs to be put to bed finally. Now you should understand that. Catasetums, now you should understand that. You know, everything you read on Catasetum says that they're high feeders. They're heavy, heavy feeders, and they're also high nitrogen feeders. Everything I saw in Catasetums, including don't water them, don't water them, don't water them, you know, wait till they get a certain size, yada, yada, yada. But I also saw they're heavy, heavy feeders because they have such rapid growth for a short growing season sometimes, where they come from. And they have to do a lot of growth, so they're heavy, heavy feeders. They're high nitrogen feeders. I've spoken many, many times, if you think back about my nutrient videos, when I talk about my nitrogen and my calcium ratios, I always tell you I like a 1-to-1 ratio. If I'm feeding a 50 parts per million of nitrogen, I like 50 parts per million of calcium along with that, or a little more extra. The calcium nitrate that I use is 15% nitrogen, 18% calcium, so it's a little bit stronger than a 1-to-1 ratio. For whatever nitrogen you give your plants, you need to give them calcium, the same amount of calcium. So when they say a Catasetum is a heavy nitrogen feeder, then in turn, it's also what? It's also a heavy calcium user, or a calcium feeder, however you want to say it. Hope that makes sense. They can't utilize all those nutrients. You can give them all the best fertilizer and all the nutrients in the world, but if they don't have calcium to stack up all those cells and stack up those cells and stack up those cells, you're not growing anything. You're not going anywhere. That's how you protect your plants, so you don't need to spray. It's how you keep your Phalaenopsis from getting crown rot ever, whether they're inside or outside. And it's how Catasetums grow. When they grow in their natural habitat and the spring rain comes, calcium would always be brought along with them, those immobile nutrients that they can't relocate. Remember the mobile nutrients. I'll go over it a lot for everybody, I'd be happy to. Mobile nutrients they can relocate when they need the growth, they need the nitrogen down here, they'll take it from an older leaf, move it down here for the growth, and that leaf might turn yellow and fall off. Senescence, it's called senescence. Where they sacrifice a part of themselves to get the nutrients. Calcium is immobile, they cannot do that. Calcium is part of the cell structure, it's part of their internal walls. They can't take it out and relocate it. So they have to have fresh. They have to have fresh given to them all the time. It has to be replenished all the time. And Mother Nature has a way of doing that. We just have to mimic it. Okay? So I hope this gives people a little bit more understanding about calcium. I know it's a repetitive talk sometimes, but at the same time, we may have also put away a couple of orchid myths here. I'm one of those people that give me the information and I'll make those decisions on myself. I'll grow my own, but just give me the information. So hopefully this is information that everybody can use. So thank you again for all the kind words, the thoughts, the messages, the prayers. It means the world to me. You guys give me so much strength and support. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Go stand out in the rain and feed your orchids. You'll love it. And give them calcium. Have a great day, everybody.